Welcome to the 65th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with Jay Bonansinga, author of many thriller and suspense novels, and Jay's latest novel is The Walking Dead: Rise of the Governor. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Jay Bonansinga, the author of many thriller and suspense novels, including Shattered and Perfect Victim. Jay's latest novel is The Walking Dead: Rise of the Governor, a collaboration with Robert Kirkman, the creator of the Walking Dead comic books and graphic novels. Jay, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Sure.
Well, or at least telephonically, be here electronically.
Exactly. Well, I wondered if you could start out by reading the first paragraph of The Walking Dead: Rise of the Governor.
Absolutely. Before I read it, I just want to say that I've been reading this here and there, and I've decided that the best way to read it is in what I'm thinking of as my Ashley Wilkes voice, because all this stuff happens in the South, and I love the South, and I think it's like, for some reason, in a weird way, it seems to fit. So
okay, that sounds
bear
good.
with me. Okay, here we go. Chapter 1. It occurs to Brian Blake as he huddles in the musty darkness, the terror constricting his chest, the pain throbbing in his knees. If only he possessed a second pair of hands, he could cover his own ears and maybe block out the noise of human heads being demolished. Sadly, the only hands Brian currently owns are busy right now, covering the tiny ears of a little girl in the closet next to him. That's it.
Okay, great. Well, a
What
lot
do you
of
think?
people. Oh, it's The Walking Dead, all right. Well, a lot of people, when they see a novel like The Walking Dead: Rise of the Governor in the bookstore, they're not really aware of how media tie-in novels work in terms of book publishing and kind of behind the scenes. Some people might mistakenly think, "Oh, Jay decided to write a Walking Dead novel," and I was just curious.
Right.
Can you explain how this project came about for you?
Sure. Well, it's ironic you say that because, I've done tie-ins. I've done works for hire over the years. I've been at this racket for over 25 years, and, I've done my share of them. And I thought when I first lucked into this, when I stumbled into this, I feel like, Winnie the Pooh stumbling into the honey pot. My agent was like, well, yeah, they'll probably just give you a script and, you'll do a novelization. And so I was like, okay, it sounds fabulous. I'm stoked. But then when I finally talked to Robert, I asked him, are you going to give me a script? He's like, no. That's not what this is at all. He's like, this is, I don't remember his exact words, but they were sort of on the line of, this is, a reimagining. This is a backstory, original, completely, fully fleshed out series of novels. And then I really started getting jazzed. and now it's become like, Lord of the Rings. We're in the middle of two towers right now. And it's like fabulous. So I just really knew the right person that knew the right person. I really kind of knew somebody that knew somebody. And, my buddy and agent in Hollywood, Andy Cohen, is friends with Robert's producing partners. And, they got us all together. And, I've been writing horror for a long time. And I've even worked with George Romero. And I'm kind of a zombie guy anyway. So I'm hoping and thinking that may have had something to do with getting to the gig.
Sure. And do you have a sense, not to be too, not to pry too much, do you have a sense, were you kind of in the running with others, or was it just that connection of...
No, that's a good question. I was in the running. There were like five other guys, and, I was certain I wasn't going to get it.
Sure.
The more I learned about it, I knew about the comic, but I didn't know much about the TV show or how big this thing was going to be. I knew it was an Eisner Award-winning comic, and really that's our Bible. That's our sort of Alpha and Omega, is the comic. But, I didn't know at the time when I was signing on to it, and there were other guys buying for it. But I the more I learned about it, and the more of the issues of the comic book I, brushed up on, the more I'm like, wow, I really want this. And, so I really started to woo them, So, whatever it was,
that's great. And I'm curious. I mean, the title of the novel is The Rise of the Governor. Was it your decision to focus the novel on the governor? And I'm also wondering, for those listeners who may not be familiar with The Walking Dead, if you could just take a moment and try to describe the governor without giving away too many spoilers.
Right. Well, that's the central issue of the material is where it comes from and how it gets to me and how I flesh it out and how Robert and I work together and how this process has been organically kind of shaping up to what it is, and it's all been great. The thing about the governor, if anybody's familiar with the comic, or if you're not familiar with the comic, I would recommend going back and grabbing either some trade paperbacks or even the hardcovers are beautiful collector's items. You can get a hardcover of like many issues, and there's about 7 hardcovers, so you get the entire comic series. But the first hardcover through the 3rd or 4th, Governor is basically what I would call the main villain, the main heavy. He's just the most incredibly evil, messed up villain. And I even think he won an award, like an Eisner Award for Villain of the Year in 2009 or something. But anyway, he just sort of the heroes of this survival saga. They just sort of run into his lair. They sort of stumble into his web, and he just tears tears a hole in the comic. He just takes it up a notch. Mm-hmm. And so Robert Kirkman always thought it would be fascinating to do a really fully fleshed out study, maybe in prose, of where this guy came from, how he got this way, what the Armageddon had done to him, and so then when I learned, and this is our process, Robert will give me an outline, and when I learned that this outline was going to revolve around who the governor is and where he came from, I thought, oh my God, and I took a deep breath and I'm like, it just couldn't be a better gig. It just couldn't be a juicier assignment, It's probably a little bit like, Terry Brooks must have felt this way when George Lucas, hired him to write about, Anakin Skywalker or something, that's how I felt,
Sure.
I just was so jazzed about it. So
I'm now, curious, circling back a moment to kind of the process. I'm curious, if you don't mind talking. You said so. You got an outline from Robert Kirkman, and that's where you realized that it was going to focus on the governor. And
right.
How did the process work? Did you write a complete draft, or did you send the novel to him in chunks? And if you did send it to him in chunks,
you're sort of reading my mail. I did send him chunks, and it was like a perfect process for me. I've been doing this, like I said, I've been doing this for a while. I've been writing books. I've got 14 books, in print, and many of them are horror, and some are thrillers, and some are suspense, and some are nonfiction. And some I've even ghost written books and stuff. I'm really just a journeyman writer, and so I felt really comfortable working this way. It's like I think I would write. I think it was like 75-page chunks or something like that, and then the small inner circle would take a look and just make sure that, everything was going well. And fortunately for me, everybody, dug my writing. And then there were fascinating little things like Robert would go, I love it, it's really moving along, I really like where it's going, but on page 73, that guy has a tattoo, and in the comic, you see him, shirtless, you see him naked, and there's no tattoos, so we gotta remove that tattoo. And there was a lot of little stuff like that for continuity, so that all these universes, all these venues, these mediums would stack up and would comment on each other and be continuous. And like you could enjoy the comic book and then, side straddle over to the book and enjoy that, but everything would sort of jibe. And that was really a fascinating part of the process.
That's great. Well,
yeah.
over the last several years, zombies have really exploded in pop culture with comic books, novels, video games, movies, the television show of The Walking Dead. In your opinion, and I'm sure you've probably given this some thought, what is the appeal of zombies, or why is that?
Well, I think being a George Romero fanatic, and actually having the really great fortune of even getting to know him a little bit and working with him and just falling in love with the guy. He's one of the coolest people I've ever met on this planet. And I've always believed that he tapped into, what the meaning of the zombie is in the 60s and 70s, which is different than what the zombie means to culture today and why it resonates today. But when Romero's working in his early phase, and he was making Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, where the zombies sort of infest the shopping mall, and it was a thinly veiled, metaphor for this out of control consumer society, and just this disgusting, vulgar consumerism and mindless, obeyance of advertising and stuff. It just resonated so perfectly in its day, and the gore and the horrific aspect just added to it. It just enhanced, the symbolism and stuff. That's my perspective. I would never say that to George, though. He's such just a humble guy, just a lovable, ex-hippie.
Right.
And you just do whatever, if you see that in it, that's fantastic. It's whatever works.
That's great.
But anyway, I'm rambling a little bit, but just to focus on your question. But today, I'm convinced today the zombie is taking over as the horror icon of the moment. For a while it was vampires and Twilight, and the vampire's obviously a psychosexual metaphor, psychosexual icon, burgeoning sexuality, repression. It came out of the Victorian era. It was invented at the turn of the century when everybody was repressed and, keeping their sexual urges pent up. And that's a completely different metaphor. Today, the zombie, to me, is so beautiful and it resonates so powerfully. It's because of the hideous times we're living in, because of mortgages being underwater and people getting foreclosed on, and nobody trusting anybody anymore, and all it's like these are sort of blunt instrument problems that you can't move. You're stuck in your home, and every morning, no matter how much, Valium you take the night before, you wake up and there's that moldering, putrid problem again coming at you, and no matter how many of them you kill by shooting them in the head, there's just millions more coming,
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, for some reason, I really think the zombie is speaking to our times in a weird way, and that's why The Walking Dead, among all the zombie incarnations and iterations of movies and, media and comics, The Walking Dead is the most powerful because it's these, very three-dimensional or fascinating, flawed heroes struggling to survive, to try to get out from under it. And I think people feel like that right now. That's what the world looks like to people.
Sure. I think you're right, unfortunately, for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think you're definitely onto something. To shift gears for a moment, I know that you've written, as you've mentioned, 25 novels, and your own suspense and thriller and horror novels, prior to writing Rise of the Governor. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you first got interested in writing. What was that kind of initial drive to write your first novel and try to get it published?
Well, like many writers, I don't know if many, it's true, but like a lot of writers, I started out as a kid just copying things. I remember I wrote an entire book when I was like 12 years old. It was because at the time I loved a writer who was known as Trevanian. He wrote, thrillers. He wrote like the Eiger Sanction, and he had these like super, brilliant, sexy spies. Like the very James Bond, very,
Sure, I'm familiar with him. I actually interviewed Don Winslow, who wrote a Trevanian novel, if I'm not mistaken, about a year ago.
Yeah, that's cool. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
I guess he was an advertising executive. I can't remember his real name, but anyway, so I just wrote my own Trevanian novel. I still have it somewhere. It's hilarious. but I had done that. I've actually typed a novel that I've loved. I've actually just typed it to feel what it feels like, to type a great novel, But I wanted to do it for so long. It's hard to even remember back when I didn't want to be a writer, and I also wanted to be involved in horror my whole life because I'm 52. I was born in 1959, and I grew up. I was weaned on Rod Serling. I remember when I used to watch Rod Serling, host the show, Twilight Zone, and I'd see this cool guy in this black mortician suit with the thin lapels and skinny tie with a cigarette, addressing the camera. And I thought when I was, 11 years old, like he was the coolest guy I've ever seen. And then I found out he wrote the stuff, and I'm like, oh man, I got to do that. I got to be that guy, and I got to write, And so that's, I've wanted to do it ever since Rod Serling first appeared on TV.
And so what was that process like for you to sit down and actually, as you said, kind of type out and copy a novel that had already been published? Did you feel that was something that you needed to do to kind of to see how it was done in effect, or what was that like for you?
Absolutely. I recommend it to anyone who's serious about writing or any art for that matter. I know a lot of musicians. I have my family's just full of musicians. I come from musical family, and they do the same thing with like a Charlie Parker solo or the score for some great piece of music, and they just learn it backwards and forwards. And they'll, and it starts when you're a kid, when, you listen to the, Jimi Hendrix, solo and then you just replicate it note for note, over the course of weeks and months, just meticulously. And it's like a really beautiful exercise. It's almost necessary. I mean, I teach creative writing now and again at Northwestern and DePaul University. And, I often, see there are two categories of students. There's the fan, and then there's the student who's just basically getting credits, and is not really as interested in the field of writing. But the fan, in my experience, the person who loves it and is a fan and would be reading this stuff, no matter what, and probably would be writing if they were dropped on a desert island and they had no hope of any publication or sales. but they would still just be writing. But, they're the ones who succeed and do really well. It does come from a love. Stephen King is probably one of the biggest fans of horror. He reads everything, and he's just like a big kid. And I think that's where his genius lies.
Sure. Well, I know from research that in addition to writing novels, that you produced and directed a film Stash, and you've done script writing. I know that writing novels is entirely different from working on a film, which is an extremely collaborative art form. I wonder if you could talk about the differences. What appeals to you about novels and what appeals to you about working in film?
Well, it's funny because it's not as different as you might think. I agree that, on the surface, there are two different mediums in there, and one is very collaborative and the other one is solitary, and one costs a lot of money to create the product, the end product, and the other one is fairly inexpensive. Publishing is getting even more and more inexpensive because of the digital, book world.
Right.
But so is film. Film is going the same way that publishing is going. Film's getting cheaper and faster, and it's great. It's great. I'm of the opinion that it's all really good for the art. It's good for the mediums of both, film and prose. But at the end of the day, the differences aren't as profuse as you would think, because especially if you're a writer-director. Because, I took, like for Stash, for instance, I took a short story, a horror story, really a twisted one, probably one of the most bizarre things I've ever written. It was published in Cemetery Dance, and then it was reprinted here and there. And I got a lot of mail on it, and I took that and I thought, okay, this is the perfect controversial cult indie film. It's like the same, it's like the same instincts, the same impulses that got me to write it in the first place were present when I was adapting it and raising the money for it. And it worked out beautifully. I mean, it seemed to live in that other medium, and I think I used the same toolkit, when I was directing it, just the storytelling, basic storytelling toolkit. And I have big arguments with academics about it, because everybody wants to sort of compartmentalize this stuff.
Right.
But I tell my students, really, you're talking about telling a story, and you're going to either be doing it with images, or you're going to be doing it, with prose. But the structure is the same. There's a beginning, middle, and end, and it's more similar than you would think.
Gotcha. Well, I read about a book that you wrote and was published, Pinkerton's War. I wasn't clear if the book was narrative nonfiction or if it was a historical novel.
It's narrative nonfiction. It's some people call it creative nonfiction, but that sounds like it's a bunch of lies. I got 75 pages of endnotes. That was the challenge on Pinkerton's War, is that I've discovered this story that sounds like a suspense film. It sounds like a just an amazing movie that you would see, and it's all true. And it has to do with this guy Alan Pinkerton, who essentially was our first inner city undercover detective in the 1850s in Chicago. Mm-hmm. But he became instrumental, and he entered the world stage when he accidentally, almost stumbling upon this massive conspiracy and insurgent plot to assassinate Abraham Lincoln on the way to his first inauguration. And it was all set. It was going to happen in Baltimore, and the conspirators were highly organized, and it was a real threat. And Pinkerton uncovered it, and he convinced Lincoln to sneak into Washington using a series of midnight trains and underground trains, and Lincoln traveled in disguise, and it's really this amazing story. And then eventually Pinkerton, who saves Lincoln's life in that early in those early years, was asked to come to Washington and create what now is known as the Secret Service.
That's interesting. I think a lot of people are not aware of that part of history.
Yeah, I know. That's why that was sort of my impetus behind, and that's what really got me jazzed about it, was that it was sort of a hidden piece of history, arcane part of history. Not a lot of people knew about. I mean, I even took this. I talked to Civil War scholars, and they were like, "Really, Pinkerton did that? What year was that? Oh, I did not know that." And I was like, "Wow, this stuff is really exposed in the body of literature." Not that there's anything on Abraham Lincoln that's not completely, explored from every different angle. But this, I think this is an Abraham Lincoln side note that not a lot of books have been written about.
Interesting. Are there other historical books that you would like to write?
That and the fact that Abraham Lincoln was a vampire hunter, but that's a completely different story. I'm sorry. What was that?
I think that's been written.
Yeah, right. You're right. Even that's been written.
Yeah, exactly. Who are some of the writers that inspire you and that you enjoy reading when you're not writing?
Bradbury, when I was a kid, Ray Bradbury, he's probably the first writer that really sunk a hook into me and showed me literature, modern literature, not just pulp, because I love pulp, and I've read pulp all my life. And, my mom and grandma were big fans of James Cain and, Betty Davis movies, and they warped me. Even when I was 8 years old, they would let me stay up and, watch black and white noir films, and I love that, and that's part of my background. But Bradbury was really the first true influence, and I carried around R's for Rocket in my pocket and was inseparable with it, and reread it many times. And I'm actually really delighted and touched that I've been asked to contribute to a book based on Bradbury, and it's this, there Margaret Atwood is in it, and it's just like this, Dean Koontz, and just this huge honor roll of fantasists and major writers. And
what book is that?
It's called Bradbury Lives, and it's the works of works. It's got a long title. It's
okay.
Something like, I don't have it in front of me, but it's something like, it's an anthology, and it's called Bradbury Lives. Works dedicated, inspired by the works of Ray Bradbury. Stories inspired by the works of Ray Bradbury, or something like that. I'm sorry I don't have it in front of me.
That's okay. And is that published now, or is that upcoming?
It's upcoming. It comes out next year.
Oh, okay.
And we're going to have a big release at Comic-Con next year, and I'm really excited about that. And that was one of my huge influences. And then also Harlan Ellison is another writer who not only was an influence when I was a kid, and I read his masterworks, when I was a teenager. Mm-hmm. Then I got a chance to meet him, and he became a mentor.
Wow.
In fact, the first time I met him, I wrote this book called The Black Mariah in 1994, and Romero signed on to direct it. New Line picked it up, and it was a great experience, even though it never got made into a movie.
Sure.
But I worked with Romero on it and got to meet George, and it was a great experience. And so then the following summer, I'm out on the road doing signings and stuff, and this was my first book. So I'm at Comic-Con, and I'm sitting at the table, with some other authors, and all of a sudden I see this little dynamo of a guy, like a scarf, and a beret, and it's Harlan Ellison, and he's coming toward me. I'm like, Jesus, Harlan Ellison. And he comes over to our table, and he looks at us, and he sees my name, and I'm like, it's great to meet you, Harlan. I'm Jay Bonansinga. And he goes, oh, yeah, I know this book. I read it. I'm like, excuse me? And he goes, Yeah, I read it. Yeah, it was good. I'm like, oh my God, seriously, you, Harlan Ellison, you think and so I'm like making an idiot of myself and being like a fanboy and everything. And Ellison, he's so jaded and used to this stuff. And finally, he lets me go on and on for a minute, and then he looks at me and goes, "Look, I said it was good. It's not Les Miserables."
That's great that you have a Harlan Ellison story.
Yeah. And I loved him from that moment on. There was something about that was so honest and sort of, Harlan-esque.
Yeah, exactly. Well, when you talk to aspiring writers, what advice do you give them for pursuing their own writing and trying to get published?
Well, I think I've mentioned one of the main things that I urge people to do, which is read. If you're not like a huge fan now, become one. Just absorb as much of it as you can. And I advise younger writers and fledgling writers, don't treat it as a precious thing. Don't treat it as a finely buffed jewel that you take out of your drawer every once in a while to show the select few. And if somebody even looks at it askance, you're offended. Don't treat it like that. Treat it like a job. Treat it like a profession. Be a professional. Get your stuff out there and get dirty and rewrite it and get it in front of people that, don't care about you and don't know your name. You're just a number, and just, get out there and, basically be professional about it. Because I think that's actually in an odd way, that's where the art really starts to emerge when you're calloused and tough and you know what you believe in and you know when it's working. You develop that. That's a rhino skin, tool. And so that's and as I said, the ones that are fans, those are usually the people who go on and have careers. The people who are fans who are talented enough to be professionals. If you can be a fan and a professional, that by the way, incidentally, that defines who Robert Kirkman is. He's the ultimate fan of this stuff who is just, happens to be almost by coincidence extremely talented and brilliant, But he began as a fan of this stuff, and he loves comics, and he knows them inside and out, and he lives and eats and breathes them, and that's why I believe he's Robert Kirkman, And so that's just, I think that's something you can actually willfully do. You can say, well, I'm going to just read the classics, and that's, totally believe in that.
Great. Well, what are you working on now?
Well, as I said, I'm just embarking on what I think of as our Two Towers, our middle book, the Walking Dead series, and also to continue warping the Peter Jackson metaphor. We might even work on these next two books all in like one epic, work session over the next year. I'm hoping that I can work on both books 2 and 3, because these, without spoiling anything, I'll give you a little nugget. These 3 books, this trilogy of novels that are original novels that began with The Rise of the Governor, they are going to form like an epic piece of storytelling. I can't tell you how they're connected, but I can sort of give you that hint that they are going to be an epic set. The people are going to want to have the 3, and that's not just a commercial.
That's great.
And
well,
that's about all I can say right now.
Yeah, sure, I understand. I look forward to reading those as they come out. Where can people find more information about you and your books online?
Well, thanks for asking, and a good place to go is www.jbonansinga.com. That's got a lot of, links and news, and it's got my blog, and but also lately there's a lot of Facebook pages that are really fun to visit. Like there's the Walking Dead Facebook page, which is run by St. Martin's, and that's a lot of fun because Robert's on there a lot, and I go on it and we comment and the fans talk, have dialogues and stuff, and I highly recommend that one. That's a really cool, place to go. And also, if you're interested in seeing, an elongated kind of preview sampling of Stash, my film, there's a website, www.stashmovie.com, or the Facebook page for Stash, and you might get a kick out of that.
That's great. And is that available on DVD, or how can someone watch that?
Yeah, it's available on DVD. It's available, in all the usual suspects, Netflix, Amazon. It's available at the distributor's site, which is Singa Entertainment, SINGA Entertainment.com. And I think it's on sale. I mean, you can get it like a $14.99 down to $9.99 or something on that site.
Okay.
And yeah.
Great.
It stars Marilyn Chambers in her last film before she sadly passed away.
Well, thanks. Again, we've been speaking with Jay Bonansinga, co-author of the new book, The Walking Dead, Rise of the Governor, available in bookstores now. And Jay, thanks for doing the interview.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to my latest podcast. If you have a chance, please leave a review of the podcast in iTunes. It only takes a moment. Until next time, read some good books and be well.
Audible has the best in audio entertainment, like Yearbook, Seth Rogen's new collection of laugh-out-loud personal essays told by Seth with help from friends like Nick Kroll, Dan Aykroyd, and Jason Segel. With Audible, hear the latest bestsellers and new releases, plus loads of included podcasts, originals, and audiobooks that you can listen to all you want. Start a free 30-day trial today at audible.com.
At Kings Island, it's never too early to start thinking about next year's fun. That's why we're offering the lowest price of the year on a 2022 Gold Pass right now. That includes unlimited visits this year, so you can enjoy Tricks and Treats Fall Fest, Haunt, and Winterfest. Then unlimited visits next year to try new foods, hang with the Peanuts gang at Planet Snoopy, scream on our world-class coasters, and splash away at Soak City Water Park. All for as low as $105 plus applicable taxes and fees. Hurry, offer ends soon, so get your Gold Pass now at visitkingsisland.com. It's amazing in here.